When the Industrial Revolution first came to Britain and the US, there was a high demand for labor. Families quickly migrated to rural farm areas to the newly industrialized cities to find work. To survive in even the lowest level of poverty, families had to have every able member of the family to go to work. Children were not treated well, overworked, and unpaid for a long time before anybody tried to change things for them.
Wages and hours. Children as young as 6 years old during the Industrial Revolution worked hard hours for little or no pay. Children sometimes worked up to 19 hours a day with a 1 hour total break. This was very extreme for children to be in such harsh conditions. It was not common for children who worked in factories to work 12 to 14 hours with the same minimal break.
Not only these children working long hours, but also they were in horrible working conditions. Large, heavy, and dangerous equipment was very common for children to be using or working there. Many accidents occurred injuring or killing children on the job. Not until the Factory Act of 1833 did things improve for the children, but were paid only a fraction of what an adult would get, and sometimes the factory owners would get away with paying them nothing.
The factory owners justified their absence of payroll by saying that they gave the orphans food, shelter, and clothing, all of which were far below par. The children who did get paid were paid very little. One boy explained this payment system. They, boys of 8 years, used to get 3D. D is abbreviation for pence, or 40 a day. A man's wages is divided into 8/8 as well.
The treatment of children in factories was often cruel and unusual, and children's safety was generally neglected. The youngest children, who were not old enough to work the machines, were commonly sent to be assistant to textile workers. The people who the children served would beat them, verbally abuse them, and take no consideration for their safety. Both boys and girls who worked in the factories were subject to beatings and other harsh forms of pain and infliction.
One common punishment for being late or not working up to quota was to be weighted. To be weighted meant that an overseer would tie a heavy weight to the worker's neck and have them walk up and down the factory aisles. This could last up to an hour. Weighting could lead to serious injuries in the back and or neck. Punishments such as this would often be spent under stricken rules. Boys were sometimes dragged naked from their beds and sent to the factories only holding their clothes.
Movements to regulate were people in this time period that strongly advocated the use or abolishment of child labor, or at least the improvement of the support of their reasonings with ideas that it was good for everything from the economy to the building of the children's characters. Parents of the children who worked were almost forced to at least approve because they needed the income. There were, however, some important figures that fought for the regulation, improvement, and or abolishment of child labor.
The first step to improving conditions was in 1833 with the Factory Act passed by Parliament. This limited the amount of hours children of certain ages could work. Specifically, children 9 to 13 years of age were only allowed to work 8 hours a day. Children under 9 were not allowed to work at all. Also, the children were to attend school for no less than 2 hours during the day. Perhaps the most important part of this act was the part that said the government would appoint officials to make sure the act was carried out and complied with.
Later in the early 20th century, activists went even further to protect children's rights in labor. Among these figures was Jane Addams, founder of the Hull House. Activists in the U.S. made the government set up the Children's Bureau in 1912. This made the U.S. government's responsibility to monitor child labor.
Forms of child labor, including indentured servitude and child slavery, have existed through American history. As industrialization moved workers from farms and home workshops into urban areas of factory work, children were often preferred because factory owners viewed them as more manageable, cheaper, and less likely to strike. By 1900, states varied considerably in whether they had child labor standards and in their content and degree of enforcement. By then, American children worked in large numbers in mines, glass factories, textiles, agricultures, canneries, home industries, and as newsboys, messengers, bookblacks, and peddlers.
Child labor declined as the labor and reform movements grew and labor standards in general began improving, increasing the political power of working people and other social reformers to demand legislation regulating child labor. Union organizing, the children labor reforms were often intertwined, and common initiatives were conducted by organizations led by working women and middle-class consumers, legislators, and working women's societies.
These organizations generated the National Consumers League in 1899 and the National Child Labor Committee in 1904, which shared goals of challenging child labor. These included through anti-sweatshop campaigns and labeling programs. The National Child Labor Committee's work to end child labor was combined with efforts to provide free, compulsory education for all children, and culminated in the passage of Fair Labor Standards Act in 1938, which set federal standards for child labor.
In 1832, New England unions condemned child labor. The New England Association of Farmers, Mechanics, and other working men resolved that children should not be allowed to work in the factories from morning till night. Without any time for their health, recreation, and mental culture, for it endangers their well-being and health. Grace Abbott was with the women's rights community, and later in 1917 she joined the Child Committee. Grace Abbott stated this quote, "Child labor and poverty are inevitably bound together, and if you continue to use the labor of children as a treatment for the social disease of poverty, you will have both poverty and child labor at the end of time." Grace Abbott.
She later became leader of the Children's Bureau of America. A Children's Bureau is an agency that works to improve issues involving children, such as child abuse, child labor, and foster care and abortion. Grace Abbott attempted, but failed to get ratified in the amendment to limit the child labor of children under the age of 18. It later became a law. Lewis Hine founded the National Child Labor Committee in 1904 that fought the Knights' awareness and well-being of children suffering from child labor revolution.
Lewis Hine photographed the horrors of child labor going on. People came hoping they would have a better life working in the industries. Factories offered nothing of that hope or better life. There were 8 hours of labor, 8 hours of recreation, and 8 hours of rest. There were enough reasons for the upstandards of part in child labor to help end many individuals.